You have probably noticed that there is a supposed rise in prejudice against Asians in the United States. It's a tactic to divide Americans and get them fighting one another rather than the common enemy, Marxism. I have a problem with this so-called prejudice on two levels, politically and personally. Let me talk first about the personal aspect. I've had Asian friends for most of my life. Early on, they were of Japanese ancestry, two of them in particular. Both of them spent World War II in an American concentration camp simply because they were of Japanese ancestry, having been locked up by the Roosevelt administration. They lost everything in the process, their home, businesses, but not their self-respect. Even though they were confined to these camps, they also bore the weight of rationing of their food and supplies, just like the rest of the country endured at the time. One of these gentlemen gave me the ration book that his uncle had when he left the camp at the end of the war. Each of the pages had small stamps to tear out and give to the grocer or butcher for their monthly ration. It was the same as what my parents did during the war. I recall going to the market with my grandmother, and she had to give stamps, and as I recall, a small red cardboard coin to the butcher for meat. In spite of these Japanese men being interred during the war, they were both very patriotic. In fact, as many of you may be aware, many Japanese men volunteered right out of the camps into the United States Army and served with great distinction in places like the Italian campaign. One of my friends became a member of the John Birch Society. I recall having one friend over for dinner one night and asked him how he liked a particular rice dish we served that was more of a salad than a main dish. His answer was that he and his wife commented on their way home that it was strange what Caucasians did with rice. Actually, this man was one of the funniest people I've ever known and used to keep me in stitches all of the time. But he did it with a straight face, and many people never recognized his humor as a result. Regrettably, he died very young of a heart attack in his late 40s. On another personal level, more often than not, when on speaking tours in the western United States, there are Asian people in the audience, Chinese, Laotians, Vietnamese, etc., who've come to the United States having fled communism in their native lands. We see more and more of them active in the anti-communist movement, and many joining the ranks of the John Birch Society. In addition, the recent rise in the circulation, both on the internet as well as hard copy, of the newspaper The Epoch Times, is another indication of the Asian influence within anti-communist circles. Which leads me to the political angle of the Asian prejudices. It must be of great concern to the enemies of liberty within and outside of America of this increasing involvement of the Asian communities in the freedom fight. Those who mean to rule us cannot allow this to continue. So they've started a faux campaign of supposedly fighting prejudice against Asians to enhance what little prejudice may exist. I don't know if it exists, since I've never run against it, since just a little bit after World War II. The more the media and the Biden administration call out Asian prejudice, the more Asians will believe that it is widespread, when it's not. Let me go back to one of my friends again as an example. He mentioned that there were people who were prejudiced against Japanese. And I suppose he was right, since so many were affected by the war in the Pacific, and it was just right after the war. He gave me an example of this prejudice when he had walked into a store and the clerk there treated him terribly. So he knew that the store clerk was prejudiced against Japanese. My reply to him was this: what if I'd walked into that store and he treated me the same way? Would I have thought he was prejudiced or simply a jerk? In other words, Tad, that was his name, Tad, don't think that people are prejudiced simply because they're jerks. They're that way with everybody. But Tad was predisposed to think that if people treated him badly, they were prejudiced. And this is the idea that the Marxists are trying to inculcate into the Asian communities today, so they see any slight as a prejudice rather than a lack of decorum or simply good manners. It is another means meant to divide us, getting us warring against one another rather than the common enemy, Marxism. We've seen it in action with the black community for decades, haven't we? And now they're ratcheting up the division amongst Americans who are Asians and their friends who are their neighbors. Some of the problem is that we see the Chinese communists infiltrating our country, and many of us are pointing this problem out. In the process, there can be some prejudice against all Chinese to come out of it. We have to be careful in this regard and always distinguish the difference between Chinese and communists. Not all Chinese want communism or work for the communists. Temper our remarks to communists, not Chinese, Vietnamese, etc. We fight the Marxists, not any race. Divide and conquer has been a strategy for defeating a country since the dawn of man. It is no different today. We in the John Birch Society see no differentiation between people due to their country of origin or their race. What we see is whether they are people of character, and if they are, we welcome them into the fold. That's simple. As much as you can, first of all, don't fall for the campaign to divide the Asian community away from the rest of America. Second, wherever possible, use every opportunity to heal any prejudices and get people noticing the inner man, not the outer appearance. It's the right thing to do. Nonetheless, we cannot afford to become divided against one another when the enemy can use these divisions to conquer us. Educating Americans includes all people. Get all Americans reading the basic fundamentals of Americanism as well as the issues of the day, and then enlist them into action.